articulate what I really feel about this, because I think it's so important. I really do often champion an integral approach to practice, you know, that where nothing's left out, that the light of our awareness really does need to travel deep and comprehensively into all of our experience. And I also do, you know, say a lot that as householders, and I'm imagining most of us here are householders, that the depth of our practice is really tested in our relationality to the world, in our relationships to how we contribute, in our relationship to our sexuality, to our livelihood, you know, to psychology, to who we are. There's so much to come into relationship with, to our families, to our children, etc., etc. And I like to say that as householders, the world is our monastery. And just to say too that my own experience of practice, when we really sit for long enough and we start to sort of wake up our inner instinct or our inner compass, that very, very, very naturally, if we really listen, our practice tends to take us where we need to go. It will tend to highlight what's needed internally. And for me, that's been a very instinctive process. You know, it's been a lot more of a, I think practice is a little bit like a wild animal. You know, it's not something predictable. It's not something that you can just do the same thing all of the time. It will tend to change depending on what's really going to meet you. So that's also how it's happened to me. And that's how I have opened into a kind of conversation between dharma and then a more of a psychotherapeutic track, because my practice sort of started to take me there. That's what was needed for my own deepening. That was needed for my own growth or reconciliation or attention to what was moving through me. So it's been very instinctive. So in that sense, that I hope I do it justice and able to articulate that to you today. So I wrote that the Buddhist practice offers us a generous view, that the Dharma offers us a very generous view, that we do not need to be defined by our neuroses. You know, we do not need to be defined by what we struggle with, by our own, you could say, personal shit. That ultimately this is not who we are. And that this can allow us to find our seat in freedom, no matter how brilliant, you know, or messed up we might find ourselves to be. Yet, however, I wrote, embodied practice that might foster these flashes of freedom, these flashes of openness into something about our own nature, will also begin to shine a light on what I sort of term developmental cracks in our psyche, you know, the particular wounds in our psyche, particular places where we're not so developed that need attention, you know, places that are hurting, screaming, raging. And so then I wrote that many meditators can sometimes bypass this material. It's become another bit of a buzzword, hasn't it? Spiritual bypassing, like mindfulness, something I'll talk about later. But meditators can bypass or downplay this human material, yet many are beginning to knock on therapists' doors. I'm sure some of your doors, maybe many of your doors, those of you who are psychologists or psychotherapists, and are beginning to engage in this personal work. So, there we are. I keep looking down at all your faces, so staying in that. So this inquiry into these two streams, it's the second in this series that I've been doing. You know, the first one some of you were on was Why the Body, which sort of set the ground. Some of you were here for that one, and some of you maybe weren't. But in the Why the Body, which I think is really connected to what I'm going to talk about today, is I think one of the genius of the Buddha in what he put forward in the foundational practices was about how essential it is to have a deep, intimate relationship with our own body, and that that's not something to override. That's not something to discount or negate in trying to wake up. That it's actually through the body and the vehicle of the body that our body can be our anchor to reality, that our body has something substantial to it, deeper than our conceptual mind, something wild to it, like nature, something a little bit more uncontrived. And through anchoring into the body, we can start to settle into our experience. Through anchoring into the body and coming into sensations and feelings and the breath, we can start to cut through some of the dream stuff of the mind that can take us all over the place, where the mind can take us when we're running on fear or worry or anxiety very quickly. It can lead us into some pretty, sometimes treacherous, untrustworthy territory, just dream stuff. So we come back to the body. And I think that the body, staying in the body, is something too that can help safeguard against this spiritual bypassing, where we want to sort of lift up and out. We think we want to get out of this situation. But what the Buddha was really pointing to is that there is no sort of exit up and out, but there's rather an entry and an entering into our experience. And I mentioned in that talk that beautiful sutta with this beautiful practitioner and the Buddha are having a conversation in the forest, and they were all practicing in quite a mystical way, some of those yogis there, and so they were like flying out through the galaxies and the Milky Ways. Some of you remember me talking about this, and this man was lit up, Huon, and he was talking to the Buddha, and he said, is it possible by me traveling to the far ends of the cosmos, to the ends of the cosmos, for me to be free of suffering and stress? And the Buddha was saying, they said, no, it's not just in that way. He's like, he was listening. And he said, no. The Buddha said, no, but he also said, but also you will not come to the end of suffering and stress if you cannot travel to the far ends of the universe. He said, but the way you travel to the far ends of the universe is by deeply entering your own fathom-long body, that everything that you need to know is inside your own experience. So this sense in this, again, I'm just setting up the context for the day. If you can just stay with me now, then we'll dive into the silence. But this sense of this, that say nirvana, what we think of as nirvana, of freedom, is not found by exiting our experience, but by deeply probing and entering all the dark, fleshy, organic parts, the real parts of our own life. So this nirvana, this cooling off of the heat of our reactivity, this heat in us, is found by staying. And this learning to stay in the body and to stay in our experience, whatever it may be, is such an art of practice, and something that we grow in capacity. And something that the practices we'll be doing this morning, informed by these foundational teachings of the sati patthana, sati being mindful, patthana staying close to ourselves in a wise way. Because the question is, well, how do we enter? That's very important. In what way do we enter experience that helps loosen the knot of suffering, that helps ease stress? So the Dharma putting forward a method to become intimate and to get over our squeamishness about the truth of our human situation that has so much grace and so much grit, so much pain and loss and heartbreak and so much beauty and delight. That speaks to all that this dancing human form negotiates. The mad scale, of like full-blown despair, to profound luminosity and freedom. The Buddha really speaks to this and how to be with this. How to begin to stay and see the impermanent nature of our experience. So this morning, so these two streams I'm talking about, the dharma practice, this orientation of a spiritual practice, we could say, and then this orientation of a psychotherapeutic practice. And I kind of wanted to delineate these two streams a little bit. Because we have so much now, don't we? We have so much Western contributions to human development, of how to work with what arises in us skillfully. There's so many different approaches now. And I think so many of them have been so helpful and have helped really feel out some things that the Dharma won't always answer. And if we could say that a psychotherapeutic process, that it works with our personal story, how to make sense of our personal story, how to grow more into a cohesive human being, how to tend to some of those developmental cracks and gaps in us, how to individuate, how to have some sovereign sense of ourselves, to know who we are in relation just to our family or our culture, that process of individuating. And this sometimes track from an integral vision has sometimes been called the stream of growing up, to grow up into an integrated human being. And then we could say the other track, the Dharma track, is not so much this growing up, but we could call this waking up. It's this waking up to ultimately to who we are, which is a process of widening our identity, also beyond, but yet including our personal story. So, and these two will always be braided together. But so we could say, that on a personal level, I have a personal inheritance, like we all do, that I have my own. I'm a woman, as far as I know. I am definitely a woman, and my name is Jess. And I have these different identities. I was born in Melbourne, as I said. I grew up between the inner city and the wild ocean. I have certain characteristics. I have certain blood lineages that inform who I am. I have these different identities, and I'll go more into this later on. All this is sort of written in my body. I've had certain experiences, good and difficult, that inform what happens to me, that make up this Jess. And then what the Dharma points to is that sometimes we feel, but that's not all who I am. That I have also a deeper ground to my being. And different traditions will speak about this in different names. Different spiritual traditions will speak about this in different names. Again, I'll track this in the talk later on. But this feeling that there's also something else to me, that there's something that in me that can outshine that conditioning, that sort of personality, that personal self. There's something in me, the light of my own awareness, that can outshine my own constraints. That there is a witness in me that can look upon all that moves through me. And so this, what the Buddha would call, and what he once spoke to his son about, he said, I've given you a personal transcendence, but what I can also give you is this transcendental inheritance, a wider sense of belonging to life, beyond this, your own clan, beyond your own personality, beyond all these borders. So one is more bordered and bound, our identity. And then this other one is something more boundless in us. And these will both inform each other. The more we sit the more we sometimes sit and the deeper we go. And as we get quieter, a lot of our personal life, a lot of our past that hasn't been experienced will start to arise, will start to demand attention. Through going into the deeper ground, more of our intimate life will arise quite strongly when we're practicing well, you know, that the shit will sometimes hit the fan and we're pressed against some of our own pain or what maybe we've left behind, our personal story. Yeah? And equally, and I know some psychotherapists also work in a transpersonal way, we could say, that like the Buddha says, no way out but in. You go so deep into your personal story that sometimes you'll sort of come out the other side. And we can see this in Huon. And I've been reading his book lately of his dreams and his reflections. And it's a beautiful book if you would like to read it, about Jung's dreams and memories. And I wanted just to read you one quote, because this is really interesting on this theme. He says that as a young man, my goal was to accomplish something in science. But then I hit upon, he says, I hit upon this stream of lava, and the heat of its fires just totally reshaped my life. And that my work, more or less, has now been a successful endeavor to incorporate this incandescent matter into my contemporary life. So these different entry points into the deep, and so much of our being and aspects of our being to come into relationship with, the personal and the impersonal, and beginning to braid these together in practice into some kind of cohesion is what we'll be talking about more later. A few more words now. You're all still with me before we dive into practice? Woohoo, we're all still here. Yeah. We're riding the horse together, making sense. It's such a beautiful territory. The deep, sane ground of our being that we can come into contact to with practice. I mean, something so profound about that. And I just also want to sort of put out there, I'm aware that like Jung said, that deep lava hit upon him, he said, and sort of burst through. And I think for each of us, a spiritual inclination or a feeling to kind of open into our full potential, or to touch something in life that is precious and valuable and meaningful, that makes sense, hits us all very differently. It hits us in very different circumstances. Some of us, it just comes on us as a sort of curiosity, you know, what is meditation? What is this mindfulness? You know, some of us in deep, maybe heartbreak or betrayal, or in periods of illness, or when we're kind of like the fierce grace comes upon us, like, what is this life about? There's one life I have in this body, never knowing truly when I will die. It's the most sort of, I mean, it's one of the things that binds us both. One of the most certainties we have is that one day we will not be in this body anymore. We have a certain amount of time. And that question, how do I want to live? And so it's interesting talking about this kind of devotion to some sort of deeper life. It can sometimes feel, I think, in Australian culture, I don't know about New Zealand culture, it can sometimes be sort of embarrassing to talk about openly, like our deepest feeling for our life. And I tell you what, in all my times teaching and speaking to people, the sort of like closet mystics I've come upon, women who've been in their kitchen or like with their families all the time and coming and sort of telling me about some of their experiences. I've never been able to talk about this before, but this is how I feel. Anyway, it always surprises me. And people sort of to be sometimes embarrassed about their spiritual life in a contemporary culture. You know, one actress came recently, was sort of saying, you know, I kind of like hide from my friends that I'm a meditator. And then, you know, then she said at the end of that retreat, but, you know, now I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to be loud and proud that I'm a meditator. Anyway, and Gerald Murnane, a beautiful Australian writer, says that in Australian culture, that we're probably more embarrassed to talk about our relationship to something divine or holy or beautiful or even God, but that word's, I know, got very complex for many of us. We're probably more embarrassed to talk about that than to talk about an illicit love affair. You know, and I know when I began teaching, I sort of felt like I was coming out of the closet, because I felt I spent an uncommon amount of time with my eyes closed. But so this desire to wake up, it's sometimes called mukti in us. It's a mukti. It's like this seed in us. You know, you can hear it in people singing sometimes in all different cultures. This movement in us to open is alive. This hit me most strongly when I was 17. I've been reflecting on this lately. You know, and I had something like, there's something else. There's something else. That was an incredibly challenging time for me at that age, but where this sort of force was coming that wouldn't back down. Yeah, and I don't know what that like, what maybe when that came to you, some movement to practice. But yeah, as I said before, sometimes it's when we're stopped in our tracks and we're sort of demanded to come into a deeper conversation with our life. And sometimes in those sort of darker nights, when we are sort of pressed into our pain and we can no longer maybe go running in the way we may once had. You know, there's some moments where the pain kind of has us by the heels and yanks us down, and we have to really stay and meet something and reckon with something. In those periods, sometimes there can be such something quite beautiful can evolve out of that. So yeah, I don't exactly know how I then, as a teenager, ended up hearing about a month retreat in Nepal and just got on a plane and went. It's sort of surprising, and part of, I think, being contemporary people, that we have access to these teachings like we never had before. That's kind of, it's quite astonishing, really, what is available to us. Okay, so we have this personal story, and then we can have this desire for mukti, this seed in us that can rise through. And yes, so just again, a few more things. As I started practicing from that time, and I started to look around at the teachers around me, and we have been so fortunate to be with such wonderful teachers. I also, this other question started to rise in me, and this has been happening a lot lately when we look around, that as I was looking at these teachers that were very awake, you know, that transmitted something that was very potent and real about how to navigate the vicissitudes of life, you know, and directing, pointing towards that deeper ground of our own nature. I also started to see that some of these people, whilst there was this waking up, really awake, alive, that there were other areas of their being that were not being attended to, that certain sort of other aspects of their being that they'd sort of like cancelled out, we could say, or certain very base human needs that were not being listened to in the pursuit of this wider awakening. And we can all sort of know, I think, when we deny certain things in our own being, you know, deny the natural, the French will say, it will come back with a gallop, you know, it will come back and bite you on the bum. And we've seen a lot of teachers lately really falling from their thrones, sometimes behaving outrageously, you know, and still being teaching well. You know, it's not like you can just cancel them all out, like because you behave terribly, you don't have some access to something really important and worthwhile. But we've seen these cracks they've been sort of powerfully displayed. You know, the sexual transgressions, the sort of violence, the way that this unworked territory has sort of come out and has really caused a lot of pain in traditions. which also I think makes this question around, well, how can we also, as we wake up, how can we really also tend to what needs to be tended to be an integral human being that relationally has a very sensitive relationality. You can get people that are very awake that still may treat women terribly, you know, and to some aspect is not awake, but some insights there. So this is just interesting, these two tracks, you know. And also for me, it was a big question seeing so many male teachers, you know, in front of me. And when I was seeing female teachers, when I was originally practicing, a lot of them were robed, that they had sort of, in a sense, their femininity or their sexuality, they're kind of given up, it's sort of masculinized in a way, or neutralized their sexuality. And that also, I was like, whoa, is that to have be on this waking up path? Do I have to do that? You know? And I didn't. I thought there must be another way, that there's a way of waking up where we don't have to cancel aspects of ourselves out. Since where more of us can keep coming to the party. And so, yeah, I remember when I first heard a female teacher speak that wasn't robed, that had long hair, and listening to her voice, I remember feeling it was like watching a moon kind of rise out of an open dress. And it was such a like a key to me. Oh my gosh, we can wake up and we can be men and women and in life and in our relationality. So again, there's sort of growth too as men, and to grow into a mature woman or grow into a mature man is also part of this picture, or a mature whatever we tend to identify ourselves as. This process of including. Okay, so now that's the introduction. Cool. We're all still here?